Today's episode has been brought to you by Schedulicity.
Welcome to episode 68 of the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast with today's guest, trauma treatment specialist Amy Hoare. Amy compiled a survey for yoga practitioners. That's what caught my eye. She was asking questions about hands-on assists, power dynamics, and abuse in a yoga class. The results were very surprising, and I like how Amy shares with us today how these results impacted how she now shares, practices, teaches yoga, and even how she took that off the mat. If you are a new listener, hello and welcome. Returning listeners, thank you for being here each week. My name is Shannon Crow. I'm a mother of 3, a yoga teacher, and I work one-on-one with yoga teachers who want to share their unique yoga while creating a sustainable and profitable business. The Connected Yoga Teacher podcast was created for you, the yoga teacher entrepreneur. Here you can connect to information, ideas, and a community of other yoga teachers who get the work. They're in here doing it. We also sometimes hear from entrepreneurs and other professionals if it relates back to how I can help you, we can help you with your yoga business. This information is here for you between the classes, workshops, and trainings that you are teaching or attending. All of the show notes and links for today's episode can be found at theconnectedyogateacher.com/68. Before we dive in, let's hear from our sponsor, Schedulicity.
Hey Connected Yoga Teachers, this is Allison with the Schedulicity Hot Tip of the Week. Shannon let us know that some of you have been asking about linking Schedulicity with your Google Calendar. Let's walk through that connection now. Once you've logged in with your admin account, head to Settings and open the Providers/Instructors page. Choose your name from the list, and under the Calendar Share header, move that No slider to Yes. Select and copy the full URL that appears in the text field. Next, sign into your Google account and click on the grid box at the top right of the page where you will select the calendar option. Click on the small plus button on the right of the Add Calendars area. Now, choose the option that says From URL and paste your generated link from Schedulicity there. Click Add Calendar and you're good to go. Google generally pushes their calendar share updates once a day, so you may see up to a 24-hour delay in your schedule changes. Also, keep in mind that this is a one-way share in which your Schedulicity appointments will be visible from your Google Calendar, but not vice versa. You may want to work out of your Schedulicity account to avoid double booking yourself just in case.
Thank you, Schedulicity. Okay, let's dive in. Back in February of this year, I saw a post from Amy Hoare in the Yoga Movement Research Facebook group, which is hosted by Diane Bruni. I'll make sure to link to that group in our show notes. Amy is a moderator in that group, and she was doing a survey of yoga practitioners, not just yoga teachers, but anyone practicing yoga. She wanted to look at the subtle and overt power abuse in the yoga world. I decided to participate, and after I did, I knew that I wanted to hear more about the results of the survey. When I went to fill out the survey, here is what Amy had written. Thank you for taking the time to complete this survey on yoga and power abuse. The information from the survey will be used as insight for my final research paper for my Trauma Center Trauma-Sensitive Yoga program. A key relational aspect of Trauma Center Trauma-Sensitive Yoga is an awareness to the inherent power dynamics between student and teacher. While there are some well-documented cases of blatant power abuse, more often power is exchanged through subtle coercion communicated through language and behavior such as physical assists. The intention is to better understand the conscious and unconscious ways in which power over is translated in a yoga class. And here's an excerpt from the Trauma Center Trauma-Sensitive Yoga website. I swear, you guys, this is like one of the hardest things to say. It's quite a tongue twister. Here it is from the website. Although Trauma Center Trauma-Sensitive Yoga employs physical forms and movements, the emphasis is not on the external expression or appearance. For example, doing it quote-unquote right, or receiving the approval of an external authority. Rather, the focus is on the internal experience of the participant. So when I got reading all of this, I got very excited to interview and talk to Amy. So it goes on to read, Trauma Center Trauma Sensitive Yoga allows participants to restore their connection of mind and body and cultivate a sense of agency that is often compromised as a result of trauma. Amy is a yoga teacher from Toronto, Ontario, who's been following her curiosity, learning more about trauma-informed yoga. When we did this interview, she was completing her 300-hour certification. Amy shares how her research project has impacted her mindset far beyond the yoga mat as a teacher and as a student. As she shares today, she talks about no shame or division in this, to remember ahimsa, non-harming, especially to self and to the community of yoga teachers around you. One more thing before we dive in and meet Amy. I have to say that listening to this interview again, it's one of those ones that feels like I hear new things and it is just soothing to my soul. So Amy has a real way of speaking, communicating, and sharing this information, and I'm excited to share that with you guys. So let's dive in and meet Amy. So welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast, Amy. It's great to have you here today.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Tell us a little bit about your own personal yoga journey. What got you interested in yoga? Do you remember your first class?
Yes, I can remember my first class, and then also when it became more of an awareness that I was in fact on a yoga journey. But the first class I ever attended was with my sister. I think we were in Canmore, and I just remember being like quite overwhelmed by the emphasis on breath. I was like, wow, like I really couldn't link my breath with the movement, and I found it quite challenging and interesting. That was probably in my early 20s. When I got sort of serious about yoga, I was living in Vancouver, and where it became, I would say, a journey is when I decided that I wanted to become a teacher. Really more for my own healing, though. I was seeking yoga out as a form of healing, rather than coming to it after a long dedicated practice as a student. It was something that I was seeking out as part of a healing experience.
That's amazing. I love how you also said that in your early 20s, the breath was really challenging. I think that helps us just to remember back as teachers what beginner students feel like.
Yeah, absolutely.
So then you moved to Vancouver, and that's where your yoga journey started when you decided to become a teacher. And is there anything that you can remember back from that time that really informs what you do now?
It's interesting. It does in a sort of roundabout way. The training that I was attracted to really did sort of talk a lot about transformation and healing. The school that I studied at was with Karma Teachers in Vancouver, which operates now as a not-for-profit, bringing yoga to folks that often can't pay. So it's a pay-what-you-can program. So I think that sense of giving back or community-based is part of it. The program itself, though, sort of described itself as, working through trauma. So 100% I can relate to that, although now I have a very different lens about what that means and a responsible way to do that, if that makes sense. So
I would love to know more about that.
Yeah. So what brought me to it was the interest in trauma, and how I feel about it now is maybe different than I did then. But
can you kind of articulate any big difference that you feel like now you have a different awareness of trauma?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, thankfully, trauma is becoming more in, there's more awareness to it. It seems like there's more interest, and it's becoming more commonly discussed. With that, though, I think there can be like a lot of sort of confusion about what it is and what it isn't, and ways that are supportive and ways that are maybe less supportive in helping folks that have trauma.
What feels like your definition of what trauma is?
So the trauma definition that I most often work with now is for complex trauma. So with complex trauma, it is a trauma that is repeated, so there's a duration element to it. And then the other piece of trauma is that it's always relational. So trauma happens in relationship, and therefore trauma is healed in relationship.
That's amazing. I'm fascinated by all of that.
Yeah, and sorry, to go back to kind of complex trauma, this sort of relates to the studies that I'm just wrapping up now, which is my 300-hour program with the Trauma Center's Trauma Sensitive Yoga program. So that's really informed so much of my work and how I feel about offering yoga now, and also sort of highlights back to my experience in 2015 doing my teacher training, really diving into my trauma without necessarily having the same level of awareness or supports that are available now.
Right. So this is what got me interested in chatting with you, is that I saw, it must have been on Facebook, I saw that you were doing a survey specific to trauma. Was it specific to yoga students or yoga teachers? I feel like it was yoga students.
Yeah. So to give you a little bit of background about why I was doing the survey, it was for my final research paper for my trauma center trauma sensitive yoga program.
Uh-huh.
So I was doing a research paper on power dynamics in yoga. And the survey was intended for anyone who has participated in a yoga class. So I was actually curious to have respondents that are both teachers and students, and of course some that are both, just to really get a better understanding of how power dynamics can play out within the context of yoga. And on both a more like obvious or more overt sort of understanding of what power can look like in a yoga class, as well as that which is more subtle or covert. Sometimes those are the pieces that we're not even aware of as yoga teachers or practitioners.
So you decided to do this as part of your 300-hour. Was everyone doing the same thing, or did you come up with the idea to do the survey?
The survey was my own. The part of our coursework to complete the program was to do a research paper. So the topic that was really resonating with me was power dynamics. And given that I had access to this wonderful group, it's the Yoga and Movement Research Community Group. I think you probably found the survey on.
Yes. Diane Bruni's group. Yeah, I love that group.
Yeah, so I moderate for that group and knew that I would have a wide range of voices. And then I had actually done a survey in that group as well before, so I had a sense about who the demographic was as well, which was helpful in putting together some of this data. So yeah, that's where the survey was born from. At the time that I had crafted the survey, I wasn't entirely sure how it was going to fit in, if I was even going to use the data in my paper. But I just sort of followed the lead to put this out there and let's see what happens. And the results were surprising in some cases, not so surprising in other cases. And my intention was really just to have some inquiry, just to have some more information about what's going on, real and perceived, and to see if some of the things that I have learned through my trauma sensitive lens are in fact showing up in real life yoga.
Mm-hmm. So how many people did you survey?
So 146 people completed the survey.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was. I was really pleased with the number of respondents.
And what were the most surprising things that you found in the survey?
So there's a couple pieces. I mean, I think I could kind of group this into maybe overt, maybe power abuse or coercion, depending on what language you like to use, and that which is more subtle. So I was more sort of surprised or interested in some of the more subtly coercive elements that might happen in a yoga class. But maybe we could start by just like looking at some of the broader topics. Like the first question, for example, was, have you ever been physically abused by a yoga teacher? And, 11.6% said yes, which is a pretty staggering number when we're looking at this is very like overt form of dominance or coercion in a class.
Exactly. And yoga professionals overall, we're known for being a helping community of people. So that is really high. I'm interested in now other professions and what that number would be, massage therapists, dance teachers.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you can find examples of physical abuse in the yoga community on videos that are available online from highly respectable teachers.
Yes.
So when you start to look at it, it's sort of ingrained in the culture to some degree. We're looking at hierarchical lineages of teaching, and if there was abuse sort of at the top, then it's not that surprising that that's filtered down, especially with some of the older generations.
Right. And I think we're at a point right now as well with the whole Me Too campaign and people speaking out more, and just what I've seen in the yoga world over the past, I don't even want to guess in how many years it is, where people are starting to speak out a little bit more, especially right now. So I think that's empowering as well. So question number 1 was surprising. So that was 11%. Anything else that you found was really shocking?
24% of folks identified as having been verbally abused by their yoga teacher.
That is so high.
Yeah, it is. It's like it's a little bit shocking. Certainly a little concerning. From my perspective, it's like, how is this happening, or where is this happening? So, admittedly, one of my biggest regrets with this survey is not having a mechanism for more of a deep dive to further understand some of these. So that might be research project phase 2 is to get more information.
Like I can think of an example, not being verbally abused myself, but being in a class. I was traveling and taking a class, and the teacher started calling someone out. It was a Bikram hot class. I'm not saying all Bikram classes are like that, but I was in shock that this person was yelling at someone. And I did go back to the studio one more time. There was a different teacher there because I had one of those like go to yoga as much as you can kind of thing while you're traveling.
Yeah.
And someone said that she got fired. So I don't know if that was true or if it was just I don't know. I was traveling through and just taking a class, but
sure. And I'm the other challenge with this type of survey is there's so many possible dynamics that can exist between teacher-student. In some sort of guru settings where guru-teacher, it's like there's almost a tolerance for a certain level of abuse. I think, like if I'm really calling it out, just coercion in that relationship, where it seems like there could be some like pushing towards reaching something, or so it almost seems like there's a certain level of tolerance for some abuse depending on the lineage and how quote unquote like deep you are in your studies.
Right.
Yeah. So I wonder if it's less common in a drop-in class versus where there's actually more of a relationship.
That's interesting. Yeah. Anything else then that you found?
This one I found was interesting. So the question was, have you ever noticed your yoga teacher value their experience over yours? And 68% of the respondents said yes.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's interesting information to sort of dig into, like why might that be? What could that be about? Yeah, and I think just with the inherent dynamic of teacher-student, teacher has power, and to not sort of acknowledge that or be in relationship with it, and perhaps like looking for ways that we can share power. I think it'd be, sometimes easy just to sort of be on your trip. I remember when I was like a newer yoga teacher, I can recall at times sort of getting caught up in what I was offering as more of a performance, like sort of being more in that performative mindset where like you're delivering this thing and it's going to be a grand class, as opposed to like really being with your students and being there for them and holding space in that way. So I wonder if that's a possibility.
Do you think that doing this survey has impacted the way you teach now?
I do. I think it reinforces a lot of what I've learned through the Trauma Center, Trauma Sensitive Yoga program. So essentially, my yoga journey took a detour once I took a 20-hour trauma sensitive course. And just from the information that I learned in that 20 hours, it sort of changed the trajectory of how I was going to teach going forward. Because what I think is really interesting and sort of under-acknowledged is how pervasive trauma is in our culture. So many of us are survivors of trauma. And one stat that gets quoted quite often is, 1 in 4 women are survivors of rape. When you start looking at stats like that and you think of a makeup of a yoga class where, 80% of the practicing population is women, that's according to a study that was done in 2012 by the Yoga Journal. You start to understand that the makeup of your class it's not like there's traumatized people and then there's normal people. it's kind of all of us. So is there a way that we can take care and be more aware of what's good for this group of traumatized folks might in fact be good for the majority as well. So it's really shifted the way that I teach yoga for sure. Like to the point where I stopped teaching public classes, and while I've sort of been immersed in this study, I just really felt like an impetus to pull back and sort of go inside a little bit and do some reflection and refinement on what it is that I'm offering.
Mm-hmm. We had a previous guest in an early podcast, Margaret Howard, who is a therapist, and she was saying everyone has trauma, and trauma training needs to be part of every 200-hour. That was her take, and I appreciated a lot of what she said in that, and I hear it in parts of what you are saying as well. So in saying that you took a step back from teaching public classes, what does that feel like for you? Does it feel like you're taking a step back to integrate what you're learning and then you will be back there teaching public classes, or does it feel like your teaching is evolving into something else?
Great question. I think it's kind of got two parts. One thing I'd like to offer, if it's available, is just to draw a distinction between what I would call trauma-informed, like a trauma-informed yoga class versus trauma-sensitive yoga. So trauma-sensitive yoga is an adjunct treatment for complex trauma. So in other words, when I complete this training, tomorrow's actually my last class.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. I will be able to call myself a trauma treatment specialist. So the goals, the therapeutic goals of trauma sensitive yoga, are quite contained. There's a specific evidence-based model for this being an effective treatment for trauma survivors. So I'm going to just sort of set that aside for a moment, where trauma-informed yoga, in my opinion, is what most yoga teachers might consider becoming if they don't already identify that way. I wonder if there's a curiosity to maybe understand some of the elements that would be common to any human that's survived this life so far. So in terms of offering public classes, if I continue to teach yoga, they will for sure be trauma-informed classes. It's kind of like once you see trauma, you can't kind of turn the blinders off or go back, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So there's certain aspects of how I used to teach that just would no longer be relevant. Like one example would be offering physical assist. For me, especially in a public class, the benefit of an assist is completely it doesn't stand up to the possibilities for it being problematic.
Right. So you're just saying for you as a teacher, you're thinking no more assists at all because the benefits just they don't add up to.
Exactly. The challenges outweigh the benefits.
Right.
Yeah.
Anything else that you can see that has definitely shifted since you've taken this training?
Yes. The other piece that's huge, I would say, is my language.
Yeah.
Yeah. So invitational language for me has just become the norm. And what I think is interesting is that the more that I integrate these teachings, the more it applies to not just a yoga class or yoga setting, but just how I speak in general. So really noticing where I am being like coercive in my language, where I'm demanding, where I'm commanding, where I'm, telling versus asking.
That's huge. So can you give us an example of that?
Yes. And, it's made it almost challenging to go to a public class now, because the sweetest, most like heartfelt teachers when I go to a public class are like still telling me what to do, like lift your leg, place it here. And, I understand that intention is huge, but for someone that has been told what to do, so someone that has complex trauma where you could almost imagine it like a chronic power struggle. You're constantly told what to do or how to be or what to feel. That's one example of how trauma could play out. So it can almost like be reinforced in a yoga class through the language, without really any awareness by the teacher that their language is coercive. So yeah, if you want an example of how invitational language would come in, it might be something like, if you like, you might like to try stepping your leg forward.
Right. Instead of saying step your leg forward.
Exactly. So it can get very, very nuanced as you move into this practice. And again, certainly for my purposes as a trauma treatment specialist, it's imperative that every offering comes with an invitation. In a trauma-informed yoga class, maybe it's just that you're inviting more invitation into your language as opposed to only using commands. And I know that it is counterintuitive to what many people were taught. I, for example, was taught the Ashtanga lineage, where my language was like very directive, and that was praised.
Mm-hmm. Well, even for me, I'm just thinking of my teaching style. I try and limit the cues that I make, and so it is more directive. But what you're saying about the trauma, so I feel like I've been really lucky to be working one-on-one with someone who came to me over a year ago, and she has a whole other team working with her around her trauma. And one of the first things that she told me, she's also very aware, and she's taught me a lot, because I told her, I don't have a specific training in trauma. She said, I know, but you have specific training in pelvic health, and that's why I'm here. So she told me at the very first class, you have to watch me because I will just do what you say instead of doing what I'm comfortable with.
Yes.
Yeah. And so that my language is so different with her. And I would say it's pulling into my class, but you're making me think that I could be looking at my entire group class as well. It's pretty powerful.
Yeah, I really want to offer this just as point of curiosity for yoga teachers, not a judgment or, you're wrong or you need to change.
Right.
But, is there a possibility to be more aware of these subtle things? Because someone with trauma isn't going to come in and say, hey, by the way, I have this trauma. Like that's not going to happen. And we know enough statistically to know that we have trauma survivors in our classes.
Yes.
So is there a possibility to take on some of the learning and see how we can incorporate it? I think that's a really interesting story that this client of yours shared, and it's very common. People that are healing from trauma are very used to orienting themselves towards their outside experience. So they're sort of you can become like an expert at exteroception, noticing the sounds, noticing the cues. Looking for what pleases the teacher, right? So getting validation for something that you're doing, even if it doesn't necessarily feel good inside, like that is how folks that have trauma orient. They're experts at that outside orientation, where there's like sometimes to the detriment of their inner experience. So one of the focuses within trauma-sensitive yoga is interoception, really feeling yourself from the inside. How does this feel in the body? And of course, with that though comes awareness to like how much of that we're offering, because it can be overwhelming for some people. Their body isn't safe, and doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
So it can be a fine attunement process, but truly, I think a little bit of awareness can go a long way, or just like to get a little bit curious about it.
So is the other piece of that then having the skills to deal with something that's going to come up when someone is looking inward, when you said it's a fine balance? I mean, this is where I'm just thinking of working with this woman. She also sees a therapist and a pelvic floor physiotherapist. So there's a whole team of 3 of us with one goal to help her with her healing goals. And when I get stuck, I know that she's seeing her therapist as well. Like when it crosses over and it's not my scope of practice, but is there something that we can add in as teachers, like?
Yeah, I think I hear you. I think you mentioned scope of practice, and I think that's so important just to honor and acknowledge your scope of practice. For trauma sensitive yoga, unless you are also a therapist, the idea, even part of the screening process, is that this person would also have a therapist so that they can do that more frontal lobe processing, that top-down approach to processing trauma. The physical practice or the yoga is more of a bottom-up approach to healing. So using the body to help heal the brain, and that's where interoception comes into play. So that's maybe noticing some sensation in your leg as you're in a form, like offering something like that. Would be a way of helping somebody develop an interoceptive awareness.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating.
Yeah, I don't think as a yoga teacher you need to take on being a therapist. I think there might also be a misconception that trauma-informed yoga somehow means that we're processing our trauma in the yoga class, and it's not that at all. It's a yoga, as many other embodying practices, are a way to become more embodied and to let the body do some healing as well, because the body has a trauma memory outside of whatever the brain is processing or not.
The other question I have for you, and this is, again, with my experience, is that my goal when I work one-on-one with someone is to stretch out the time between our appointments. And I find when I work with people who have had trauma, or other people who I just in general working with yoga students, they often really gravitate towards that being led. And I wonder if that touches on that power dynamic. Like, my goal is that they can go home and do this practice on their own without me.
Well, it's interesting. One of the core components, and one of the healing aspects of trauma sensitive yoga is a shared authentic connection, which is sort of, it's supported more by attachment theory as opposed to trauma theory, but the two definitely go hand in hand. So one of the ways which trauma sensitive yoga, again, this trauma treatment modality, differs from a traditional yoga class, is that the facilitator is doing the yoga forms with the student. So there's this shared authentic experience, which could be in part why you're noticing your students are gravitating just towards being with you. So that could move into sort of like an attachment piece, like a healthy attachment where there's safety.
Okay, so you're saying that's an okay thing, and to not fight that, like.
Yeah, I wouldn't fight it. The really interesting thing about this program that really has reaffirmed like my love of yoga is non-attachment, is non-attachment to outcomes. Really letting go of needing to get anyone anywhere, even progressing into the forms, or valuing certain forms as higher. Like, these are some of the questions that came up in the survey as well. It's like, within the trauma sensitive yoga practice, the form is sort of secondary. The form is the form. It's kind of not the point. The point is a shared authentic experience, the practice of making choices, and bringing interoceptive awareness. So the sort of underlying theories that are in a trauma sensitive yoga program are attachment theory, trauma theory, and then neuroscience with interoception. So that's kind of what's underscoring it.
Mm-hmm.
So when I take that back into my, let's say, public classes that I would offer, I feel like my goal and what I would like to offer is just to really hold space, really live and demonstrate ahimsa, non-harming, and to practice non-attachment.
Is that one aparigraha? Is that our yama niyama? I feel like
that's for sure. Thank you.
This is fascinating to me. That is opening a whole new perspective on things. So thank you for that, because I feel like often I have on my form, what is your goal? Like, and I want to help my student get to that goal. And what a different way to look at it, instead of getting to this place, which we know that we don't like hit this place of, I've learned everything now. And I am now enlightened. Like, well, I think
Right.
that anyway. We don't have that. So it's interesting that I've been expecting that with my students, that they would hit this point of yes. They definitely reach goals and wins in that, for sure. But I could see where I could let go of attachment. And that might be part of the power dynamic that you're talking about too.
Yes, exactly. Sometimes I think as teachers, we're sort of like committed to our students, getting better. I'm using air quotes here.
Yeah.
Or, or arriving at this new place. And it's like, maybe, and maybe not. And can that be okay too? Can you just really be there to hold space and, allow for the journey? And I think the research and evidence is there that if this practice is continued, that healing does happen, but we don't necessarily need to be attached to what it looks like.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. Is there anything else that you would add to that list? So I've kind of jotted down here, the assist has changed for you, your cues, like more invitational instead of directive. The interoception, is that on that list? Is that sort of in your cueing as well?
Interoception is definitely, it's a huge aspect of definitely a trauma-sensitive yoga class. I think for trauma-informed as well, though, because it's helping develop a skill that is perhaps underdeveloped. So I have noticed in my own yoga life, the teachers that I naturally gravitated to were doing that already, whether they were aware of it or not. So it's that, like, maybe noticing what this feels like in your shoulder, right? And so maybe noticing what this feels like in your shoulder would be sort of it would be like a dosage of interoceptive awareness that is on the lower scale, rather than just saying, and maybe noticing something, or maybe noticing anywhere in your body. Like for someone that has trauma, that could feel like very like, I don't know where to go with that.
Right.
Also normalizing feeling nothing. I think very often we're sort of like, and feel the opening, and it's like, that's not necessarily everyone's experience or even available to everyone.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
So, and like being prescriptive about what you should be feeling.
Right.
Yeah. Or what the form needs to look like. I think you might notice I'm saying form versus pose.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. So pose for me now feels like we pose for pictures, we pose for other people, right? Which again orients us towards that exteroceptive experience of being seen. Certainly for someone that's experienced trauma, they've possibly been posed in a way that wasn't their choice. So by using form, it feels it's less like attachment to the way that this thing needs to look. It's like we're exploring a shape or a form.
Shape or form to me also feels like you kind of move into it and then you move out of it into something else.
Yeah, it's a little more fluid.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I think is helpful anyway. Like, again, for my own yoga practice, I've really sort of taken to this sort of functional movement trend that's happening, and it's brought so much more freedom and joy to my own yoga practice. So, when I practice yoga now, I'm exploring different angles. I'm placing my foot where it feels good, not in these sort of like precise, very sort of parallel setups, and that's my choice, and it feels good. And I appreciate teachers where there is choice. I feel like if I went to a public class and someone came and tried to like adjust my foot based on their experience of where it should be, like I would probably say something.
Mm-hmm.
But that's because I can, and many people wouldn't say anything. They would want to please the teacher. And that's where I think we can get into like, why are we saying this? Like, why does this matter that if the foot's exactly right in this precise location? Like, can we look at our own attachment to what does it mean if the foot's somewhere different? Is it going to be okay?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I'm laughing because of my own journey with that, going through really rigid alignment, even assisting students and thinking, all right, I just have to get everyone in this pose as a new teacher. And so and also as a student being in a class and thinking, I can't do warrior one like that. And dreading that the teacher would come over and correct my warrior. Yeah. So
that's where I, like, some interesting information from the survey kind of came up around that, around physical assist. Let's see. So have you received a physical assist or adjustment without your consent? 65% of people have, which wasn't overly surprising given how sort of pervasive it is in many classes.
Yeah.
This one was surprising though. Have you ever felt pressure to receive a yoga assist adjustment even if consent was given. And 37% of respondents said they have. That's where it sort of went with my initial, one of the biggest changes in a public offering is that I wouldn't do an assist now. And that's kind of the why, is that even when people have said yes, there can be this subtle coercion just because of who I am in relationship to the student. Like there's a lot of folks are oriented to pleasing other people.
This is so true. We also talked about, I think Margaret brought this point up, that she at one time as a yoga student went to a class and felt like she had to receive assist because that would mean she was more open to, like she was just kind of a better human on the planet because she could have an assist.
Absolutely. Exactly. There's so many like possible ways that this can get a little bit mucky. Like there's all of the assumptions of the student, there's all of the assumptions of the teacher, and then they're like interacting. And of course, like this could play out a million different ways depending on who the teacher is and who the student is. So
I think the other thing you brought up here when we have so many different, like when we're in that group class, everyone is having a different experience, like you said.
Exactly. And I feel like if we can sort of, maybe pull back a little bit as teachers and maybe be a little bit less attached to, again, like what are they actually doing?
Right.
Then we can focus on the yoga.
Yeah. Interesting. Wow. That gives me a lot to think on. Was there anything else in the survey that you thought, wow, this is really powerful information?
I think this one's a little bit interesting for me. Have you noticed that some advanced yoga forms or poses are valued as more spiritual than other forms, or than other forms by your teachers through statements such as, going deeper? And 66% of people have said yes. So I think that's kind of goes back to our discussion around attachment to the form, or this idea of we need to be taking people somewhere, that there's somehow like a hierarchy in experience through the physical asana. And, that's something I just would question if that's true or not, and if that's helpful or not.
A great example of this, and I've said it as a yoga teacher in my younger yoga teacher days, the full expression of the pose.
Absolutely.
Yours is a crappy half expression, and that person over there has a full expression of the pose.
And if perhaps you could just wrap your leg around your head, then you would be a little bit more spiritual. And therefore worthy of like human existence, So it's these very subtle pieces that are not, again, I don't think it's like the intention of the teacher to be harmful. I just think a lot of it's just sort of inherited, unchecked. And is there an opportunity to invite a little bit more humility, curiosity around what we're doing, and to do it in a way where it's like, if you're quote unquote guilty of any of these habits, like forgive yourself, let it go. And if you have a desire to move on and maybe create some more space for inquiry, like wonderful.
Yeah, I love that you said don't be too hard on yourself. I think that we have to keep remembering as yoga teachers, like we're sitting looking at this as yoga teachers. And you're talking about the experience of a student. And so we can always grow a lot as teachers. And this can be one piece of that. And I'm sure it was Andrea Peloso. She talked about this in a workshop that I attended. And she talked about how other professions look at how we, doctors aren't throwing each other under the bus, like saying, well, that guy did that. They collectively say, we used to do this practice and now we do this collectively.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as we continue to heal as a society and as a collective, like there's no room for pushing people out, making people wrong. Where there's curiosity to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like it doesn't help to become divisive. When there's space for anyone to try something differently and see if it's more useful.
I can certainly tell that you're embodying that just in the way that you've done this whole. I mean, you could have come on the podcast today and said, like, these are the things I see yoga teachers doing wrong all the time, but instead you've taken this on. I feel like you've taken us on a journey of what your learning has been. And then that really is a gift to us to learn along with you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And it's something that, that I work with. It's a conscious choice to examine where I'm being coercive in my own life, and to make a choice that feels more open for me. So thank you for acknowledging that. I appreciate it.
I know our listeners are going to be curious of where you took your training that you're just about to graduate from. Do you want to let them know about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am just wrapping up the 300-hour trauma-sensitive yoga program, which is led by David Emerson and Jen Turner. So they're from the Trauma Center in Brookline, Massachusetts, and they offer this program annually. When I finish or when I complete this course, I will be listed on their website along with other trauma-sensitive yoga teachers as well. So lots of good information and good resources if you're sort of curious about complex trauma or like understanding a little bit more about this vast research topic. It's a great place to start. They've got lots of resources.
Amazing. Thank you so much for doing that work and for sharing it. Is there anything else that you would say, like to yoga teachers out there who might be some of them might be feeling overwhelmed, like, wow, that was a lot of things that I might have to just look at with my own yoga teacher journey?
Yeah, I think start with ahimsa, non-harming, and as much as it's a practice towards others, like bring it in-house first. Let go of the judgment if that's available, and just get curious. Get curious. It's a nice way to operate from, like, beginner's mindset. You don't have to abandon everything you have learned. And I know for a lot of people that's scary because we put a lot of time, effort, money into these trainings and our practices. But if there's any openness to taking on that beginner's mindset and getting curious about some of these things, it's a really exciting and beautiful journey. And I have found that the application extends far beyond the yoga classroom. It comes with me wherever I go.
This is amazing. Thank you so much for this today. I'm just really contemplating here and feeling very grateful. So thank you, Amy.
Thank you so much, Shannon.
Well-connected yoga teachers, what information really came out and spoke to you with this interview with Amy today? Amy, thank you so much for your time and your passion for this topic. I feel like as a yoga teacher, it was never my intention to be working with people with trauma, but as you said, we're all dealing with trauma in some sort. And I know for myself, working one-on-one with people who are dealing with pelvic health issues, as a yoga teacher, there are a lot of things that then come up in terms of trauma. Say, for example, I might work with someone who their childbirth was very traumatic. Just this week, I was working one-on-one with a yoga student who has experienced trauma, and I used part of today's interview with Amy in that, I realized, and I wanted to share that with you. So I was cueing the student to notice with awareness, and she's so great at telling me, okay, I can't. I have no awareness right now. I don't know what's going on with my body. And so I started to cue her, okay, notice your feet. Can you feel your feet on the floor and notice what's going on with your toes? So we really focused in on one part of the body instead of the whole body overall. And that really helped. So thank you for that, Amy. Also, this month, I noticed that I really gravitated away from using any hands-on assists. And it wasn't just because of this interview. As many of you know, I love offering hands-on assists, and my students typically always love that as well. It just was an intuitive decision. I'm working with a group class who it doesn't feel like hands-on assists would be effective. I feel like my verbal cues are coming through and they really have that space and awareness to move and play around. So that was fascinating to me as well. A couple of key takeaways really stuck with me here in today's interview. One was the doing yoga together instead of leading when working one-on-one. So I feel like I have come kind of full circle in this. As a brand new yoga teacher, I would sit on my mat a bit terrified of this group of people in front of me. I was really shy and felt like I just needed to be in my space on my mat and leading them through. And I thought that as I evolved as a teacher, then I would be able to walk around the room and assist or just cue verbally. And I got to that point. And now I know that there are some times when working one-on-one or even in a group class, it is more effective for me to be on my mat. So it's this kind of dance and this flow that I found that works for me and the students that I work with. Sometimes I'm doing the yoga with them. Sometimes I'm not. But I just want you to come to a place of, what do I need? What do my students need? And we will hear both sides of it. I was one of those teachers in teacher training, cueing people like, let's use our verbal cues and not move our body and not do the practice with our students. And I'm taking a second look at that now, you guys. So I just wanted to let you know that story. Also, this non-attachment to outcome. So letting go of the goals and wins. And if you remember last week, I was talking about this after our interview with Amber Carnes, when she was talking about letting go of this striving or getting to the quote unquote full expression of the pose. So I'm doing a little self-inquiry here, and I would love to hear your thoughts on it. I am thinking in my own mind, am I to be striving to be a better human being on this planet? I feel like that is something I want to continue doing. But where does it tip over when I'm striving so much that it's not embracing that ahimsa, that non-harming to self, kind of getting into negative self-talk instead of moving and evolving and growing and learning? So I would love to hear your thoughts. I have no concrete, this is what I know now. I just have a lot of questions. So if you wanted to hear more on this topic of this full expression of the pose or changing that language, Amber talked about this last week, as I said, in episode 67, and I will link to that in our show notes. Before I sign off today, I want to give a huge shout out of thanks to those of you who helped me to really dig in and improve the copy for my Define Your Yoga Niche online workshop on my website. This is part of the work that I offer in consultation calls with yoga teachers that I work with. But as many of you know, it can be so impactful to have feedback from someone outside of your business, looking in and offering suggestions. And I have to say, this was really powerful for me to ask a little question in the Facebook group and get your feedback. I also wanted to share a review from Joyce Slaughter. Joyce writes, "This is one of the most supportive and encouraging groups I've been a member of. Such a huge wealth of knowledge and difference of approach. I learn something new every day. I recently had a one-on-one with Shannon to talk about how to niche. Our conversation was so much fun and so lighthearted that it didn't feel like work at all. I left the conversation with a concise plan of action, timeline, and goals. Business planning made fun." And I'm really excited because you guys will actually get to meet Joyce in an upcoming podcast episode. If you are wanting to book a consultation call with me, you can do that at theconnectedyogateacher.com. My summer times are pretty limited, but there are some still available in June. And then I will be right back into the swing of things in September as well. And you can book ahead if you want to. Click on the Work with Shannon up at the top. So I am curious, let's keep this discussion going. How have you changed your yoga classes to be more trauma-informed? Or after hearing Amy in today's episode, what might you do to make your yoga classes more trauma-informed? Let's chat about this either in the private Facebook group or in the show notes comment section at theconnectedyogateacher.com/68. Okay, connected yoga teachers, have a fantastic week. Stay connected to self, to your practice, and to your community so that you can really share the yoga that lights you up. Namaste.